Hello again and welcome back to the PhatPhish Guitar Studio. I'm Dave, and in this video I want to talk about like a bad habit that I've seen in quite a few guitar players. And it's something, if you don't address it, it's going to kind of hold you back, affect your ability to play fast and play nice, like smooth, fluid stuff. And worst case, it's going to set you up for problems in later life like joint pain and whatnot. Really, it's all about how much pressure you use on your fretting hand when you're fretting a string on the neck. This is something beginners always struggle with, and they kind of work out of it, but sometimes they don't work out of it enough. And also it's something that you occasionally see people kind of falling back into as more experienced guitar players. So first of all, what I want to talk about is like how much pressure do you actually need to put against a string to make it sound out? You know, if you've been playing for any length of time, you probably don't think about this. It's like an unconscious competence. You just do it. You pick your guitar up and you fret the string, and it makes a noise, and you move on, play the next note, and whatever. But you might find that you're actually putting more pressure on that string than you actually need to. Here's something to try. It's something I've seen loads of guitar teachers use. I used it myself with students for years. Just put your finger on the string as if you were going to fret it, but don't actually put any pressure on. So let's say the 6th fret on the 4th string. So just lay your finger on there and pick the string. So it's dead. Now very, very gradually increase the amount of pressure that you're putting on with that finger. Now you can hear the string there. It's ringing out nicely as if I was just playing the guitar normally. If you do the same thing, you probably find you get to that point where you're fretting the string, you're putting a lot less pressure on that string against the fret than you think you need to. You know, that amount of pressure you're using there is possibly less than your normal fretting pressure. And this is what I'm getting at, that you don't need to really, really squeeze the string against the fret to get it to ring out. And if you think about what you're doing, if you're fretting normally and putting a bit more pressure on, you're doing more work. So the act of kind of moving from one string to another, fretting at one fret, fretting at another, you're doing more work to kind of move between different positions, fretting different strings at different frets. And if you're doing more work, then potentially it's going to slow you down. So think about what your hand's doing. Your, particularly like your thumb and like that part, like the heel of your hand, it's behind the neck. Now, your hand's position around the neck depends on what you're playing. You know, sometimes you'll be playing thumb over the top of the neck, kind of like bluesy sort of stuff, you know, if you're getting into doing string bending, or it might be a bit more like thumb along the back of the neck, you know, if you're playing more stretched out stuff. But either way, this part of your hand, really all it's doing is just anchoring the neck in place. But this is where you kind of need to analyze what you're doing with your fretting hand, because what I see a lot of people doing is they come along and say, this is particularly newer guitarists, they feel that they really need to squeeze the string against the fret. And in doing so, the neck's going to want to move back a ways. So you kind of counter that by using the thumb and the heel of your hand to squeeze the neck in place and kind of give it some sort of forward motion to counteract the pressure of the strings. But because that's moving forward, you need to put more pressure on the fretting finger, and it becomes like this vicious circle where before you know it, you're really squeezing the living heck out of the note. And as we just demonstrated with that simple exercise, you don't need to put so much pressure on. Really, your thumb, your heel of your hand, like what's happening at the back of the neck, should just be really just to anchor your fretting fingers. It's not really playing a part so much in like forming the note and part of the fretting process. When you're getting into bending, perhaps where you've got a thumb over the top of the neck and whatnot, but for general fretting, you're not needing to squeeze the neck. You should just be touching very, very lightly, much lighter possibly than you think, touching the string against the fret. And if you economize on the amount of pressure that you put against the string, it makes it easier to play. I'm not talking here about like super fast shred guitar or anything like that. Just whatever style it is that you're playing, there's going to be times where you want to play it a little bit faster than normal, bring in a bit of tension or a bit of release or whatever. And in doing so, having a bit less pressure on the fretted note means it's easier to move from one note to the other. You can just play something that's smoother and more fluid and faster, and it's more comfortable for you to play because you're putting in less effort, There I'm just kind of fairly lightly going from one note to the other. I'm not kind of fretting that note and then fretting that note and then fretting that note. It's just a nice gradual, I'm not putting lots of effort in, and that is really relaxed and comfortable for me to play. So this is the physical well-being side of this as well, because if you're putting in lots of effort and you're straining, and this is particularly if you don't warm up properly, you're going to be straining your muscles in your hand, you're going to be straining the joints. I've said this loads of times, this is not a natural position to have your hand in. So if you're doing that, you could cause yourself problems, like in the short term, just pulled muscles or whatever, and then longer term, you start to suffer with joint pain. And I know guitarists who have got, if you like, bad technique because they have a very, very heavy touch, and now they're getting on a bit, they're starting to experience joint pain when they're playing more challenging passages because they've strained the fingers. Okay, there's another aspect to this which is probably better explained with a diagram like this. So if you imagine that that's your finger poised above a string next to a fret on the fingerboard. Now if you bring your finger down slightly and touch the string, there is a point, as mentioned earlier, you can bring your finger down, it's touching the string but it's not actually making contact with the fret, so that's just going to be dead. As you take your finger down a bit further, touches the fret, so you've got a node point there, and it makes the note, that string will ring out. Now if you keep pushing down further than you actually need to, and this is particularly a problem if you've got fairly high frets, is your finger keeps going down. What you're really going to be doing there is stretching the string very, very slightly. So what you're doing is like a microtonal string bend over the top of the fret, and what that's going to do is make the string go sharp. And this is another reason why when you fret a note a little bit too hard with a little bit too much pressure, if the string goes sharp, this is why it's not so pleasing to listen to, because the note that you're playing is actually going to be slightly out of tune. Another thing to think about as well is the general health and well-being of your guitar. Generally, the strings on a guitar, electric guitar, the steel or nickel steel, whatever, and the frets generally are made out of nickel silver. Strings, generally speaking, will be stronger than the frets, which is why if you look at older guitars, you'll often see like fret wear, you'll see little divots in the fret where the string's been pushed down against the fret. That's normal wear and tear, but the harder you fret the string against the fret, the more damage, well not damage, but like wear that you're going to cause on the fret, which means it's going to degrade the playing experience quicker, and you're going to have to take your guitar to a luthier to get the frets dressed, reprofiled, polished, it's routine maintenance and something you would expect to do eventually, but you don't want to be doing it more often than is absolutely necessary. Eventually you can't reprofile frets anymore, they're too worn down and you need to replace them, which is a more invasive thing to do with the guitar and it's more expensive. So generally, if you can use a lighter touch, you wear the frets down less. I mean, certainly I've got guitars I've had for, there's one I must have had it for 20 odd years, and it got refretted because I wanted different fret. Why I wanted a different profile fret. The guy looked at it and says, this doesn't even need a fret dress. There was so little fret wear on it, because I played generally with a very, very light touch. If I played with a much heavier touch, that guitar would probably have been getting refretted because it had been fret dressed so many times. There was no fret left to redress, and it would need frets replacing. But because I don't fret really hard, I don't have that problem, and things last longer. And if you go to, this is becoming more common now, stainless steel frets, which don't wear out, which is awesome, but that means this fret is actually harder than the strings, which means if you're fretting really, really hard and putting lots of pressure down, there's actually a risk you're going to be doing more wear and tear on the strings, and then you've got the risk of string breakage, which is a really bad thing. That's why I'm not a huge fan of stainless steel frets. I don't think they're for everybody. But the bottom line is, if you really squeeze the string against the fret, something is going to wear out on the guitar. If you're fretting really, really hard all the time, something is going to wear out on you. And if you put lots of effort in, it degrades the playing experience. It's not as comfortable for you. It will be holding you back in terms of speed and fluidity, and possibly not as pleasant a listening experience for the listener. So be conscious of how much pressure you're putting on a string when you're fretting it. Like I say, it becomes almost like something you do unconsciously. I bet, you know, before you did that little exercise at the start here, you maybe weren't so aware as to how much pressure you're putting on a string. Because it's something, you know, you do it hundreds, thousands of times a day when you're playing the guitar, so you don't think about it, but it's important. So something to bear in mind and possibly address on your playing technique. This is particularly for beginners because it's a strange experience and we kind of tense up and put more pressure in than we need. But I've seen it as well where people are perhaps learning something new or they're concentrating on something. There's a natural tendency to sort of tense up, and that's where the problem exists, because you start to put more effort in. Now, if you think about trying to pick something up off a table, it's a natural reaction, a natural thing to do. You'll just move your hand up, pick something up. If you tense your arm and then try and do the same action, it's so much harder because you're kind of fighting against tense muscles. And it's the same thing in your fretting hand. If you tense up, then trying to move from one chord to another or one note to another in a lead line, you're kind of fighting against tense muscles. So, relaxing, playing with a nice light touch, it's just better all round. Okay, I hope you found that interesting and useful. If you did, please click like down there. If you really enjoyed it and you want to see other videos that I post on the channel, then please click subscribe, which is also down there. You're welcome to leave a comment, but I don't always see comments that are left on videos, so if there's a specific question you want to ask me, whether it's about guitar playing, guitar equipment, music theory, anything at all, then if you go here, there's a form you can fill in, send me your question. I'm guaranteed to see it that way and I can get around to answering your question in a future video. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.